The Hog's Die is brought to you by TicketClub.com, your one-stop shop for live events nationwide. Whether you're looking for game, theater, or live performance tickets, don't sweat it. TicketClub.com has you covered. So make sure you're going there for all your live entertainment needs, and make sure you're clicking over to them from the banner at the top of thehogsdie.com.
It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and John Worrell. And now, here's your host, Chris Leary.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogsdie Network, a show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media business complex. I am joined by my truth forgers in camaraderie, John and Steve. How you doing today, gentlemen?
I was the last time we did this show, you said that your intro, you were going to insult us, and I was a bit disappointed that I wasn't insulted.
He called me a John.
Well, I just thought maybe truth forgers would be, so arcane that you wouldn't even know what to do with it.
Well, that's true. That's true. No, I mean, all is well. There's a ton of stuff going on in sports right now. An absolute ton of stuff. So it's a good time to have to gab about sports, I suppose. But yeah, everything's going pretty well for me.
I too am well, Chris, and I appreciate your interest and asking. It makes me feel good in my heart when you hit me with these softball questions. Thank you.
Well, we're just warming you up for further softballs. But no, of course, in the world of sports business, nothing is simple, nothing is easy, nothing is handled in a few hours. But we will take about 50 minutes here to discuss some of the hot topics. The first one being, kind of longtime listeners might say, oh, this old canard, where we talk about the various legality, medicinal benefits, moral quandaries of marijuana in society, yes, but in sports specifically, and the intertwining of the two. So, Steve, why don't you give us an update of the latest attempt of the NFL to maybe come to its senses?
I see what you did there. Come to its senses. And that did not get by me. Okay, so the big picture here is that the collective bargaining agreement is coming up to be renegotiated 2021. Okay, that's the impetus for this. And so the idea here, the NFL has kind of subtly put out in recent times, and in particular in the past about 2 weeks, that they are willing to listen about marijuana. Now, it's currently the policy under the collective bargaining agreement is that marijuana is prohibited and that they test for it, and that if you test positive for it, you get put, into the drug program. And so what has come out is that, and I reluctantly, I refer you to Mike Florio, who's a complete dope and who doesn't like the Hogstie very much, but it's probably the best. It's the article I have right in front of me, at least. And it says NFL to study marijuana as pain management tool. And the part and parcel of it is that the league and the Players Association have created a committee that, quote, will establish uniform standards for club practices and policies regarding pain management and the use of prescription medication by the NFL players, as well as conduct research concerning pain management and alternative therapies. And so sort of the general idea of that is that those two bodies will sit around and discuss the use of marijuana as a pain management tool. Nothing's going to change right now, if it changes at all. This is all aiming towards collective bargaining agreement negotiations that should hopefully start soon, but will kick in about 2 years. So we'll see where we end up. But this is the NFL signaling that they are willing to listen. They most definitely won't do it for free, nor should they. It will require some concessions by the Players Association to, quote, get this. That's my objective part of it, so I'll let it go at that before I get to unload my rant on this. But that's the objective part of it. That's what's happening here. And so the idea here basically is that the NFL is willing to listen as long as the NFLPA is willing to give in on something else.
So getting into the subjective side, which of course is what we all know is the fun side of the discussion. I've said it before. I will continue to say it. It's a matter of time before the NFL, like the rest of America, comes to its senses, as Chris said, and realizes that marijuana is not a performance enhancement situation. It is not. It is not the killer weed. It's not making anybody crazy. Depending a little bit on sort of what it is. We say marijuana as though marijuana was one static thing, and I think this is where a lot of the discussion comes into play. Marijuana comes in a lot of different forms. It has different strains. Some of them are more hallucinogenic. Some of them are more mellow. Sometimes people will have an experience with marijuana that wasn't purely marijuana. It was marijuana mixed with cocaine or PCP, and so different, because all of the marijuana experiences until very recently have taken place outside of the boundaries of any kind of law or regulation. It was a complete sort of random grab bag what was going on. Now that more and more states are legalizing marijuana medicinally or recreationally, you're starting to see a little bit of organization now inside the sort of the pot world that existed on some levels in some places before, but now is actually getting sort of the boring regulation that pot users hate. But the benefit to that is it becomes easier to determine, if you're an organization such as the NFL, what kinds of marijuana and what amounts are actually beneficial to players. And it's, Steve, you may argue no amount of marijuana is beneficial to anybody at any level. That's just
correct.
That's factually wrong, but I know that you'll argue that. There are some benefits. I think anybody with a remotely open mind would say there are some detriments, if used incorrectly, but there are also some benefits if used incorrectly or correctly. So that's my take on it, is that it's going to, this is something that society is turning on, that we are making, we're sort of evolving as a culture on pot, and the NFL is going to, it's not going to avoid that wave of change. It's going to come change with the rest of everybody else.
Well, first of all, I got to correct you on something. Nobody's ever said, the NFL has never claimed that marijuana is a performance-enhancing drug. It's not listed as a performance-enhancing drug. It's listed as a drug of abuse, not a performance enhancer. Nobody's ever claimed that.
I get that.
Yeah, but that's what you said in the beginning. That's all.
I did. Well, I said that it's not one. I didn't say that the NFL claimed that it was one.
All right, yeah. So let's just be clear. I mean, what we're talking about, there's two sides to the NFL's drug program. One is performance-enhancing drugs. That's a whole separate policy from drugs of abuse, okay? And, I mean, fundamentally, the NFL is a private business, and I don't really care what their drug policy is, really. I mean, they're a private business, and I don't want to nanny state any company, It's not really our business. The NFL has a drug policy because of public perception, okay? What it really is about is they don't want the public to perceive that their employees, because it applies to everybody, not just players, are on drugs, because that hurts the shield, quote unquote. You always hear that term, you don't want to hurt the shield. That's really what it's about. It's not really so much about them being concerned that, players and our employees are walking around the NFL offices, doing drugs. That's not what it is. So, I mean, the conservative, anti-government, anti-nanny part of me says that if it's a private business, they can either test or not test, and I don't really care particularly about it. I think the NFL would be dumb to give in without getting some concessions from the NFLPA, obviously. But if they want to test. If they don't. I mean, the larger issue of marijuana use, I strongly disagree with you on. I basically think that, the people who smoke pot are just a bunch of loser potheads, and I mean that literally and seriously. I don't think there's any benefit whatsoever to it. It's just, there's no benefit to, I strongly disagree with society sort of okaying on a macro level people using mind-altering substances and smoking things and bringing things into your body. I would be more open to listen to this argument if, for the sign that is like a pill form that a doctor is actually prescribing legitimate dosages for a specific reason. What I don't accept and won't accept ever is that this is a pain management tool and I'm going to sit around on my couch and blaze away, and somehow that's good. That's just stupid. Yeah. And that's just wrong.
I get where you're coming from, but my understanding, Steve, is you've never actually had any experience with using marijuana for pain management.
I was in the military since I was 17 years old. I've never smoked anything in my life.
I know a lot of people in the military who have, but
I'm just saying that that's
I'm not sure that's a disqualifier.
Well, it is a disqualifier. I mean, you can get kicked out for
absolutely you can. That probably will also change at some point.
No, not in the military. It won't.
Yeah, I get that you say it won't. So caffeine is a mind-altering substance. Exercise is a mind-altering activity. There's a lot that's going on in our bodies.
You're not really comparing exercise to smoking weed, are you?
What I'm saying is both of them have an effect on the chemicals in your system. And that's true.
Great together, by the way.
Yeah, exercise while high. Not
great together.
I've never been motivated to exercise while high, but I could see where it could happen. I think it's important when we make blanket statements about whether something is good or can't be good or it's terrible and everybody's a loser, is there is an effect on the healing process of marijuana. It was used. It's been used by a lot of cultures for a long time, specifically as a healing substance, as a medicine, and there's a reason for that. And we can say that it's no good, it doesn't do anything, but those words carry a lot more weight if you've had an experience using it in that way. So I smoked pot for a while after gallbladder surgery. It helped me tremendously. I didn't just blaze away on the couch, play Xbox. I was in too much pain to play Xbox. But if I had marijuana in my system, it was much easier for me to cope with the day-to-day activities of going to the toilet or getting some food or things like that. It helped manage the pain. And there's there isn't anything anybody's going to say that tells me that it didn't.
Chris,
I think listeners know where I stand, even if they've only listened for the last 10 minutes. So, that's fine. Steve, you can think all you want about that. I'd prefer to stick with the National Association of Oncologists, medical doctors who study cancer and the relation towards medicine and the treatment of it. I'm going to stick with them. Sorry me. But I'm also not going to sit here and quote pages of High Times magazine to you either, So,
yeah, but a lot of people are. I mean, the thing is, to me, it's if this is a legitimate...
I don't need to. Every piece of data, every piece of scientific research, and every piece of the speed of societal change is on my side, so I'm just going to sit back and take the win.
Take the win. You will never convince me that smoking something is a good thing. That's just an absurd
That shows
premise.
your ignorance right there, because there's multiple ways. In this,
you don't have to smoke.
I understand what there is. Okay,
but you revert to the dumb.
Yeah, but this is what these players want. Okay, about the NFL, this is what the player. These players for the most part just want to blaze away on the couch, and I'm not going to accept that. And
so silly.
And the whole idea of this like medical marijuana use that's with these clinics and everything. It's just basically it's a sham. It's these prescriptions is a complete sham. It's
again. I'll listen to it. I'll listen to the cancer doctors. I'm good.
I don't agree. I think it's. You all know my position. I think this
Steve,
whole argument
a lawyer
is
who would tell us very smartly about legal issues, is going to now, and where people misconstrue legal facts, going to tell us about cancer doctors.
Smoking
from a layman's perspective.
Smoking anything is not a good. Smoking anything is terrible for your body. I would be more apt to listen to, for the argument for marijuana use by players in pill form, because I know that exists.
There's a lot of.
How do you know that that's actually not even what is part of the discussion?
Because these players just want to smoke
dope. Where are you coming? You've said that several times. Where are you coming from that your opinion is that what the players want to do?
Because I've covered the NFL for 4 years and I have a brain in my head. Have you ever seen an NFL player I mean, seriously, how many players have been busted for smoking marijuana and are in the drug program for smoking marijuana? I mean, we're not talking about. I mean, the real issue here. I think that we could argue about this, and I don't really want to get mad. And here's the focus issue to me that applies to the NFL and sports. Here's the debate. Okay, there's a valid concern, I think, about the way the NFL manages pain. And what the nutshell of what is happening, and what's happened for decades in the NFL, is that trainers who, under some guise of medical oversight, because they have team doctors, are passing out pain pills, and they've done it forever. Okay, narcotics, and so I think players have a legitimate and valid concern that these drugs that they're taking and are not forced to take, but are encouraged to take for pain management, ultimately are terrible for them. It's addictive. There's effects that on their body that, happen, years after they're done playing. That's a legitimate concern. There's many players who've been addicted to pain management drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and Brett Favre may have been using some of them recreationally too, but I mean, yes, you're right.
Addiction does funny things to you.
Yeah. That's a legitimate concern that players have, and I've always wondered if law enforcement ever looked into exactly how these NFL teams are passing out pain pills. What would really come of it, So I think that's a legitimate concern. But what I don't think is a solution is just saying, okay, let's just let everybody smoke dope. How does the NFL solve the pain management problem is a legitimate, valid, serious concern that we could talk about, and we're not going to obviously solve the problem here today.
And one side has billion-dollar industry behind it, like the Sacklers, who are infamously the family drug manufacturers behind most of the painkiller epidemic, and one, is broadly categorized as losers on their couch. So which pills are going to continue to get passed out?
Look, I mean, there's also valid uses of pain, or Vicodin and other pain pills. There's valid medical uses of it. I think the issue to me is how the NFL is I was about to say passing them out. How the NFL is distributing and allowing players to use these is another matter. But there's also, I think you could also argue validly that, look, the players knowingly jump into have knowingly jumped into an industry that is terrible for their bodies. It's extremely physical. And they know what they're getting into here. And they're going to be in pain, and they're open for serious injury no matter what drug you put them on.
So to that argument, which has resonates in the cultural similarities that Steve and I have on some kind of live free and die ethos, that these guys are choosing that. Then my take on that similar grounds is if these guys want to bash their brains and their bodies together at car wreck speeds for my entertainment, who the heck am I to say Trent Williams can't relax on Tuesday with a spliff to recover back?
Well, I mean, again, I come back to what I said in the beginning. I don't particularly care if the NFL tests or doesn't test for drugs. They're doing it for reasons of public perception, and that's really it. And to me, they're a private company. If they want to do it, do it. If they don't, don't. What I don't agree with is the NFL sort of approving, and maybe subtly approving drug use, marijuana use as a good thing. If they want to dump it, just quietly get rid of it and stop testing for it. Basically, the NBA, I have no problem with what the NBA has done. The NBA basically has stopped testing for marijuana. It's still against the policy, and if you get arrested for it and all of that, I mean, you can be disciplined, but they don't test for it. I don't really care. And I wouldn't care if the NFL didn't test for it either. So don't misunderstand where I'm coming from. I just don't like the idea of encouraging people to smoke and take drugs. I don't agree. I don't like that at all. I can't get behind that.
So from a policy perspective, you'd probably, or at least begrudgingly or at a meta level, accepting of whether it's laws or company policies, these things are moving.
Well, no, not in a private industry. In a private industry, yes. The government, no, I'm not down with governments legalizing,
Well, what if it's
taking drugs off the drug
like-
schedule, for example.
like
I'm not down
Illinois
with
just
that.
did.
I don't agree with those. No,
But
I'm talking about private.
If it's voted by public measure or by public representation.
I'm not saying I'm going to go, move to Australia if it happens. I'm expressing my opinion of it, and I don't think it's a good thing for society generally. Private business wise, do whatever you want. NFL's a private business. Do regulate your business however you want to do it. Fine with me.
But my point is that you're basically arguing your temperance morality here rather than business or policy.
Well, not as applies to the NFL. I mean, is the NFL? I've said repeatedly, it's a private business in terms of drugs, kind of as a macro level thing. I'm okay with there being a federal drug schedule, for example. It's the Congress can create a federal drug schedule under the Commerce Clause under the Constitution, and I'm fine with that. I don't think I don't like government interference in my life, but I also don't think the government needs to encourage people to hurt themselves.
What do you
or
do when the
alter
government
themselves.
decides to put something on that schedule that's something that you think is harmless that you enjoy?
Well, I don't know what that could possibly be.
Coffee.
I don't drink coffee.
Water. Anything.
Let's
This is
hope
where-
water
this is
doesn't.
a hard
Name
argument,
something that you
Steve.
like that is a substance. I assume that you like some substances. And what
I have
is-
almost no vices. To be
It doesn't
perfectly
have
honest
to
with
be
you.
a vice to be a substance. The table
We'll
that
pick
I'm sitting
something.
at is a
I pick
substance.
I don't drink coffee. This is like caffeine. Let's go run with caffeine. For the sake
Caffeine.
of your
So
hypothetical.
caffeine. So the government decides that caffeine is a Schedule 1 drug, and it's going to take it off, and you're going to and you're not allowed to get it, and nobody can distribute it. And this is now you're okay with this.
I'm not gonna. If caffeine becomes illegal, can do without caffeine. I'll be fine.
Okay.
I mean, seriously. I mean,
I think that you'd be okay, but I think it's completely opposite to your typical stance of I don't want the government interfering with people's lives.
When it comes to drugs, in narcotics, I'm not okay with governments implicitly encouraging people to do it. I'm not okay with
But
that.
the government
in any way.
defines what is and isn't a drug, right? At one point, the government decided that alcohol was a drug and nobody could have it.
Alcohol is a drug.
Well,
It's
yes.
that
and
the boat is sailed.
and that nobody could drink it.
I would have been fine with that too. I mean, the argument is over. That's a multi-billion-dollar industry and all of that. I'm fine with the government. Hypothetically, which will never happen. I'm not making the argument that they need to do it, but I'm fine with the government. I would have been fine with temperance in the 20s.
That surprises me because
It's when it comes to drugs, I have a different perspective on drugs than I do most other things.
Well, the one thing I'll bring it back to sort of
Yeah.
business and commerce and all that real quick, and then we'll transition. Although I think we just had a moment here.
We did.
Is that
What's the we had a moment?
I'm not sure. You might have had a movement, Chris. It feels very similar, but don't get confused. Trust me.
That's my daily existence. The interesting thing, Steve, I think that you said that really does undergird this whole thing in terms of this specific iteration of this endless debate is that this will definitely be a bargaining chip by the league because ultimately they're not going to care and they'd love to wipe this away, or it's an easy thing for them to give on the table. And similar to the NBA collective bargaining agreement, it was very much used to bring the players to the table on a whole bunch of other stuff. And I think ultimately that's how we'll see this play out, in that the league will probably get a few concessions from the players in what promises to be a pretty contentious CBA, and this will be a huge bargaining chip for the league. I think that's the sort of strategic end game.
Not probably, definitely. And look, I mean, the first, in terms of CBA negotiations, the most important thing to both sides is the split of revenue. Everything else is kind of secondary to it. I think the players would have to be stupid beyond belief to place marijuana use over revenue split. That just isn't going to happen. I mean, the issue number one is revenue, period. everything else is kind of secondary. So, but certainly this is one of their issues. So we'll see what happens.
The thing that I find most interesting about this from a league and a management situation is that the nation is still state by state evolving its laws on marijuana use, and I think it's going to be interesting for the NFL to try to negotiate that situation. If they're going to allow or stop testing, then there's going to be certain teams where people are able to use at a certain degree, and other teams where they're not going to be able to unless they happen to be on the road or because there's the state law trumps the NFL.
But federal law actually trumps all these state laws. The state laws are in contravention of federal law. All these state laws are technically illegal. The Justice Department just chooses not to pursue them because that would cause a war with the states and all of that. But the NFL's position up till historically it has always been it's against federal law, and thus it's against our policy. My guess is that the compromise point, if you want me to objectively guess at this, my guess is that marijuana use will still probably stay a prohibited drug. They just will stop testing for it. So in other words, if player X gets busted like Leon Lett with 20 pounds of weed in their car,
Leon Lett.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be illegal. If you get arrested for it, I think probably where this is aiming is for an NBA like policy more than anything. They're not. I don't think the NFL is just going to just say, okay, you can start smoking dope. Yeah, right. I think it'll be don't ask, don't tell.
And Leon Lett would still be arrested in all the states who have decriminalized.
Yeah, that's just I'm just using that as a ridiculous example, but yeah.
All right, so let's move on to another topic. We are, as we're recording this, and probably as it gets released, we're either smack dab in the middle of or coming up to the end of the NBA Finals. NBA Finals, it feels like it's got a little bit of juice. We talked a couple weeks ago about the playoffs getting off to a slow start, but it seems to have gotten back into the consciousness. And with that, we got a deep story on a team that routinely is at this level of the NBA playoffs, but is on the far side looking out. And that is the LA Lakers. And it was a great expose in ESPN that basically did a lot of... First of all, what it did was, which I don't have a big problem with, but let's be honest, they talked to tons of disgruntled employees off the record, or some disgruntled employees, still employees, ex and current, off the record. And so taking that with a bit of a grain of salt, because the axes to grind against one Magic Johnson seemed plentiful. But they definitely told a story of some deep dysfunction in this Lakers 2.0, as they self-describe themselves as. Steve, as our resident Laker head, why don't you give us your take on the article and maybe a little bit of the fans' grief entry?
Yeah, it's a case study in how not to run a franchise. That's the interesting part for a show like It's Just Business. The story we're talking about here is called Lakers 2.0, the failed reboot of the NBA's crown jewel, and the author was Baxter Holmes, who, to be perfectly honest, I'd never heard of before this story came out. But the story really gets into... He did an amazing job, Baxter did, on this. It's very long, gets into mind-numbing detail about the dysfunction in the Lakers front office. It's like I said, it's a case study in how not to run a franchise. You have an owner who is the daughter of one of the most successful sports owners of the last 30 years, objectively. Dr. Jerry Buss, 10 championships, ran the Lakers in such a way that was sort of the envy of the rest of the NBA. But as is typical, the kids aren't nearly as capable as the dad or the mom, and the kids have basically ruined the team. Where this story starts is that Jeannie Buss, who is the daughter and one of several children of Dr. Jerry Buss, from sort of a bloodless coup a few years ago, fired her own brother and won a power struggle and became the Lakers owner in the eyes of the NBA. So the first thing she did, turned around and fired Mitch Kupchak, and then hired Magic Johnson and Kobe Bryant's agent, Rob Pelinka, to run the team. Magic, for those of you who don't know, Laker fans know, but Magic and Jeannie Buss sort of grew up together, if you will, and have been very, very close friends ever since Magic was a rookie. and Jeannie was a girl, a little girl, or not a little girl, but much younger. And so she hired Magic, and then Rob Pelinka obviously has connection to the Lakers through Kobe Bryant. And what sort of was ignored in the very beginning is that Magic Johnson has a bunch of other interests, and from the start told her, I can't be a full-time team president. I'm just going to swoop in and do this on a part-time basis. Problem number one.
Yep.
You can't have your team president. Being an NBA team president is not a part-time job, and Magic has proven that. And it pains me to say it because Magic Johnson is certainly my favorite NBA player ever.
Boyhood hero.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. But the other part of it, and so that causes a ton of problems. It caused problems between Magic and Rob Pelinka because Pelinka was apparently talking about Magic, to the players and making jokes about, hey, has anybody seen Magic, that kind of thing. So that's part of it. But the other part of this story is that Magic apparently, according to Baxter Holmes at least, was a bit of a tyrant inside the building, and he would swoop in, yell at people, get really mad at people, and then swoop out. And, it's one thing to be a team president of a floundering organization like the Lakers have been and be there, yell at people, but be there to help them fix it. It's a whole nother thing to yell at people and leave. And that caused a massive amount of dysfunction, here. And it certainly didn't help that Magic just up and left without telling anybody, other than the media. So it's a fascinating story. And I think the moral of it here is that, one, don't hire your friends to be in charge. And if you insist on doing that, make sure your friend is a full-time committed team president and not one that's just going to swoop in and smile and yell and leave. So it's a really amazing story. And even if you're not a Laker fan, I'd recommend reading it.
One thing that I want to do here, I want to make a book recommendation, which I've been reading this book. I like to read things that are outside of my typical belief system. So, and Steve, I think that you particularly like this book. It's called Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win, which is written by two Navy SEAL commanders, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And it's an excellent book, and I'm recommending it because I'm reading it right now. And I think that they would do a good job. I think that they do consulting right now, so the Lakers might want to bring them in and get some pro tips on how to manage an organization. Because there were like 8 things just in your description. I haven't read the full article, but just in what you shared with us just now, Steve, there are so many mistakes that went into this scenario.
Well, and what I didn't mention in the first place is that who decided that Magic Johnson and Rob Pelinka were basically qualified for those jobs?
No
in the first
experience at
place?
either. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. So I could talk forever about it because it's the Lakers. I think and the problem with it is that Jeannie Buss seemed to have not learned, even with this article coming on, even with Magic Johnson resigning. And for those of you who didn't see this, it was one of the more memorable press conferences you'll ever see. Magic came out an hour before the last game of the season, and said, "I haven't told Jeannie this, but I'm resigning." He didn't tell the owner. He told the media, and then he talked for an hour almost about why he was resigning and all of this, instead of doing the right thing and going to his boss privately and telling her, "I'm leaving." Didn't do that. So it's just amazing to me. But what I was about to say, though, is that Rob Pelinka has now assumed control of the Lakers, and that tells me that Jeannie Buss still has not learned in any way. So, Chris, thoughts?
Well, I would agree. Culture matters. I think that's a big thing that we learned, that we shouldn't have to be relearned as much as it is, but it was the underlying theme of the situation and the article. I love, Steve, your observation around his flying in and out. It is one, culture doesn't have to be, unicorns and rainbows. It has to be consistent and knowable. So that was actually the problem. Which he kind of in the in a kind of brilliant piece of vertical integration, how you could line up your big daytime talk show with him as a guest, and then use all those quotes for your long-running investigative journalism piece with unnamed sources. But side note, really fascinating that Magic even admits that, hey, I'm tough but fair, all that. That all can be fine. That's, and by the way, Magic is an insanely successful businessman. So, like, this idea that he's fails at stuff is, that's the failure is the anomaly. So that he understands you can be tough but fair. But to Steve's point, when you're not there half the time, it doesn't matter what you do the half of the time that you're there, even in the rainbows and unicorn scenario. So if you're absentee, that is the kind of toxicity that will ruin any culture. And the combination of the kind of tough but fair and then out really looked like it was detrimental here. And also, whatever the dude is, the other guy, the guy that's still there. Yeah, you fired
Rob
both.
Pelinka.
Yeah. He's also, your eyes continually roll when you read this article. This guy sounds like such a D-bag, typical like West Coast kind of Silicon Valley type of management through, poster slogans and, well, bro, I once camped in Joshua Tree with Kobe, and just that whole new age business hipster vibe that he gives off. It's just so gross, and the fact that remains in the culture, it means that we're going to get another one of these either at his firing or resignation, or some kind of like insider hit piece about him sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, he's a phenomenally successful agent, but agents only have to manage their office staff. Not a multi-billion-dollar business, or a business at least worth multi-billion dollars like the Lakers. So, yeah, I completely agree. I never understood the Rob Pelinka hiring from the beginning at all. And yeah, I mean, if for those of you who have been living under a rock, I mean, Magic, I don't have a data on this, but off the top of my head, Magic Johnson is most definitely one of, if not the most successful post-career athlete. That you could find. Yeah. I mean, again, I haven't done any research on it, but he's... Magic Johnson Enterprise is a major real estate company, and it's worth 10 figures. He's really made a lot of money, and he's not willing to give that up to run the Lakers. Hence the problem. The consideration from the beginning, from the ownership, should have been, I'd love to have you. I love you like a brother. Magic. You and I have known each other for 40 years. However, if you're going to do this, you need to be all in. And put aside, let somebody else run the business for a few years, and they didn't do that. And
I expect, she's been working with Pelinka now for 20 years or something as well, right?
I mean, in terms of interacting with him as Kobe Bryant's agent.
Yeah. But I think it goes back to the story of she's hiring people she's known a long time.
That's the Laker way, though.
More
the Lakers
so
have always done that.
Yeah, what I think back to was when, as a Washington sports fan, I remember when we brought Michael Jordan in, and sometimes the challenge is, I don't know if has Magic. I know that Magic has done an awful lot business wise. Has he done? But he's never run a basketball team before, has he? And
Magic was a minority owner of the Lakers for a time. He sold but it was a silent ownership.
Right, he was
always just kind of like a public face of the team. He's a minority owner of the Dodgers and has never really done, hasn't taken a role in management.
One of the challenges I think that Jordan had with the Wizards was that, he brought, as an athlete and as a competitor, he has something special that people don't have. Michael Jordan is pretty much unique in his mindset and his ability, and I think Magic Johnson very much the same way. He was a singular talent in the 80s. You could not teach yourself to play as well as Magic Johnson did. He had something special, and one of the things I think that is kind of a theme when you get these. Mike Singletary is another good example. You get these guys that were very, very sort of abnormally gifted athletes, and you put them in these leadership positions, and then they can't, how is Magic Johnson going to teach anybody to play the way that he did, or to have the level of passion that he had, or to have the level of competitive spirit that he had? He can't. But so he comes in and yells at people to try to get them to understand, what his mindset was. Michael Jordan struggled with this in order. He couldn't teach these guys to be. He was never going to get Kwame Brown to have Michael Jordan's level of competitive. It wasn't going to happen. But this is what
insert rant by Stephen A. Smith on Kwame Brown here.
He tried to get some of the Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan vibe rubbed off on these guys, and it just, you can't really impart that.
Michael Jordan has not been a successful basketball owner either.
No,
and he's been a very unsuccessful basketball owner. I think what we haven't said about this yet is these people are celebrities. Rob Pelinka isn't, but Magic Johnson is a legitimate, entertainment industry celebrity, and there's a ton of ego there. Again, I love Magic Johnson, okay, and it pains me to say it, but I got to be honest and truthful. I think he strikes me, after having read this article, as someone who has a public face and a private face that are different. But, you have to remember, though, there's a ton of ego here, and a lot of what Magic Johnson has said about this, certainly over the past 2 years, has in part been stroking his own ego.
Sure.
I don't think you need a celebrity in charge of a basketball team. You need a businessman and a basketball guy or girl in charge of the team.
Yep.
That's the other moral of the story. Like, John Elway has done a terrible job with the Denver Broncos. I think Elway has done. It's been less about Elway's ego, but he's not done well either, because he can't. He's been searching for the next John Elway for ever.
He can't make somebody John Elway.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sorry, Chris. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No worries. I do think it's an issue of ego, and the big ego piece for Magic Johnson is he just can't seem to quit the Lakers, right? He's always got some angle. I mean, remember, he's also a failed coach of the Lakers. So it's always this problematic piece where he was always going to be the face. He can walk into anybody's studio show and be, and get his media seats back, all that. It's not like he has disconnected from basketball, but he just can't seem to just focus on the rest of his life without feeling like he has something to contribute at that level, and it never, ever works out for him.
The Navy SEALs I was telling you guys about would be proud of you, Steve, because they have an entire chapter about how if you're going to be an effective leader, one of the things you have to do is be able to put your ego completely aside and out of it. And I would agree. A lot of these people whose careers, their careers, even while they were an athlete and after they were an athlete, have largely existed not just to fuel their bank account, but to fuel their ego. This is what they live for at this point.
And we know he knows how to moderate that outside of basketball, right? Because what we're saying here is, for him to be successful in like the movie theater business and the other variety of businesses, he knows how to be deferential to intelligence, to experience in those other realms, because he's feeling like he's learning, or his ego is the right calibration. When it's basketball, when it's the Lakers, that's when it sort of swells.
What are you gonna teach Magic Johnson about basketball?
Right,
right. In his mind, at least.
Yeah, you can teach him something about franchising a business across 50, connected states through trade agreements.
Yeah, and real estate development and all that other stuff. But basketball, nobody's going to teach Magic Johnson anything about basketball. And fundamentally, it just didn't work. And, the bigger problem is now that it's over, Rob Pelinka's still there. I mean, what needs to happen is that Jeannie Buss needs to fire everybody in senior management and start over. And that hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. The Lakers have a history of sticking with the family. And what they need to do is go out there and find the best basketball mind, regardless of affiliation, and bring that person in as the team president. That's the way to fix a problem, and it hasn't happened. I texted my my Laker friend buddy as this was going down, and I said, the only thing left is they need to find a racist in the Laker front office, and they do that, and then they've become the Clippers, which is really sad to say.
Nicely done. That's true. They're just missing a race.
I know. That's
Lakers,
the only thing
you're
they're
just
missing
a racist.
Yeah. Go find somebody who's going to abuse housing practices, and then the transformation is complete.
And we didn't even touch on probably the other huge piece of this was all of the things we talked about, the the office politics, all of the kind of court intrigue parts of it, Magic Johnson, et cetera, that this is also, this Lakers 2.0 stretch, was then they also decided to bring in a late career, at the height of his powers, LeBron James into the mix. Because we didn't even talk about his agent and all of that angle here. So when you have this weak a foundation, or maybe let's give him the benefit of the doubt, new foundation, right? This was all starting. So things were a little bit fragile. It could go on either way, et cetera, et cetera. Then you drop the LeBron James-ness of it all right in the middle of it. And that really, I think in some ways proved to be the tinder that blew it up.
Yeah, no doubt. And what people need to understand about LeBron James is that he has a wide swath coming behind him wherever he goes. It's really of his own doing, because not every superstar is like this, but he has a lot of influence. He's frankly ruined a lot of organizations. Every organization he's been in, at some point, the aura around him has brought everything down. And he's this guy. The article goes into great detail about Rich Paul, who's LeBron's longtime agent and friend, and the article talks about how much influence Rich Paul had upon Laker management decisions. And I don't think anybody would agree that an agent should have say-so into management of a team. And that's really what happened here. And yeah, certainly that's a whole nother part of it. Yes, it's LeBron James, but at the end of the day, he's just a player, and the Laker management should have checked him and checked Rich Paul's influence, and they didn't. It sounds like it was probably worse with the Lakers than it was even in Cleveland, and the Cleveland ended in disaster, from behind the scenes perspective.
Well, he's also enabled by the leadership, right? You have an ex-player and an ex-agent. So, I think they were more welcoming, permissive than many front offices would be, because of their makeup, and that's how they sort of let the LeBron James machine in. They had less of those checks and balances.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, the only time LeBron was truly checked in his entire career was when he worked for Pat Riley. Because Pat Riley ain't going to put up with this kind of nonsense at all. Pat Riley's an extremely strong and demanding personality, and that was the time period in which LeBron James was checked, and he left because of it. In part, you could argue that a part of it was that was part of the reason why he left, and certainly the Lakers have absolutely enabled it.
Yeah,
clearly.
Pat Riley had he had the hardware and the resume to back it. He had the authority, and there's nobody in the basketball world that's going to tell Pat Riley, you're wrong and you don't get to make the. He's Pat Riley, for God's sake.
Yeah, he's Magic Johnson's mentor.
Well, that's absolutely right. Yeah, but Magic Johnson, as much credibility as he has as a player, does not have that kind of Pat Riley authority as a management person.
No. Magic Johnson would have been speaking as a Laker fan and someone who's observed the team for 40 years, Magic Johnson has always best served the Lakers by being the public face of the team, not as
He's
having
got a great
any
smile.
kind of role. Yeah, he can go out and chat up the Lakers. He can help recruit people. That's what he's best at. This management stuff, it's a disaster, and it's not going to be fixed anytime soon, unfortunately, to my great disappointment.
Well, it's your fault for being a Redskins fan and a Laker fan.
In my defense, because those of you out there listening to this, I lived in both places, okay? I lived in Los Angeles and I lived in Washington, D.C., and that is why those are my teams.
I've lived everywhere. Everywhere.
Me too. I've lived everywhere, but, I'm not a long-distance bandwagon
But
Laker
look what's
and Dodger
happened.
fan.
Look what's happened to the franchises that you've followed. Look what's happened, Steve.
The Dodgers
now
are doing okay.
Look what you've done.
The Dodgers are hanging in there.
Contrition is what I'm asking.
The Dodgers recovered from their disaster
From
ownership
Steve.
situation. It's not my fault. I'm just a fan.
All you gotta say, Redskins Lakers, is Jack can't cook.
Yeah, exactly. Jack King Cook owned the
I
Lakers.
miss Jack King Cook.
Built the forum.
Yeah.
All right, so we have two kind of mini topics to jump into here for our last segment. Let's take netting. This past week, at least when we're recording it, they had a very unfortunate incident where a ball went into the stands and injured a young girl, younger, I think 3 or 4, very young, toddler. And that brought up a kind of a discussion around, is there enough fan protection? And specifically in baseball, it's like, do you need more of that netting around the field where fly balls and, bats and everything's flying around. So that's kind of come up as a debate now, obviously because of this incident. So, what are the risks for professional sports teams with injury to their fan around game elements?
Number one, this happened at an Astros-Cubs game in Houston.
Oh, okay, it was in Houston right now.
Yeah, it was in Houston, but it was a Cubs player whose name's escaping me right now that hit a foul ball line drive, and a really sad story. If you watch the video, he's in tears, falls to his knees. He told the Houston media later that when he first hit the ball and he watched the foul ball, the first thing he did was lock eyes with that little girl, and he watched the ball go in and hit her, and that's it was really devastating. So clearly, in the immediate aftermath, the player, somebody looked at
Albert Almora is the player.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Albert Almora. Almora says they just need to put netting all around, everywhere around baseball stadium. Major League Baseball has been dragged kicking and screaming into any netting, and the reason is I think they haven't really come out and say it, but they don't want their rich people who own season tickets right on the front rows to have their view interrupted by netting. That's they don't want to irritate those people, and I think that's why they haven't done it. I'm an advocate for, there's no reason why they can't string netting from foul pole to foul pole. I don't know if it's really worthwhile in the outfield, necessarily, because, the balls that make it, the home run balls are fly balls. They're not line drives for the most part. There are a few line drives, but that's more, meteor strike kind of chances. Somebody died at Dodger Stadium last year. This kind of went under the media radar, but somebody got hit with a line drive ball and died at Dodger Stadium. Later died.
Does anybody as you bring that up? Does anybody have a status on how the little girl's doing? Now, granted,
yeah, no, I do, because I'm in Houston, and the local media reported here that she's going to be fine. I think.
Well, that's
and she didn't. She did not. I don't believe she got hit in the head. And she was not unconscious. A man who was with her, who nobody has said if the man was her father, but some man who was with her carried her out. She was crying.
Let's hope that it's somebody that she knew.
No. It definitely was, but they just nobody.
That's the real tragedy of this is that it gives strangers carte blanche to haul little girls out of the stadium.
She wasn't being kidnapped. I mean, the man was with her. It didn't say whether he was her father or uncle or someone else.
CNN says, by the way, she was hit in the head.
Okay, well, she was not unconscious when she was taken out, is my point. And the local media has reported that, I think she's going to be fine, thankfully. So, look, if you read the back, literally read the back of your ticket, or nowadays, if it's online tickets, the disclaimers that come with it, it says you're in stadium at your own risk, And so I think legally they're probably covered, they being Major League Baseball. But from a basic humanity standpoint, a lot of how many foul balls go into the stands, a game? A lot. I don't know the number. 30, 40 we went, maybe?
More than that, I think. I went to an Orioles game a couple weeks ago. It was the Orioles and the Red Sox. And there was, let me tell you, we did a segment a couple months ago about baseball attendance. There was, I think, max 4,000 people at the stadium. It was ridiculous. Most of them were Red Sox fans
too.
It was. Most of them were Red Sox fans, and this was in Baltimore. And it was actually a pretty good game. There was some exciting moments, but we sat. I think I was row 18 off the first baseline, and we had the netting in front of us. And I was very grateful. A couple times a pop-up would go over the net, and but you talked about it as somebody who doesn't go to baseball games very often. Those of us who went, we were talking, okay, well, if a pop-up comes up, you're going after it. I'm not going after it. Your job is to protect us from the. Somebody had an umbrella because it was raining, but I'll use the umbrella. That'll stop us from the foul balls. And there was a couple, 4 guys in their 20s who were certain that if anything had actually come our direction, they would have happily leaped up and clawed their way over us to get to the foul ball anyhow. But the netting stopped me from what I was really worried about, which is somebody's going to rip one a line drive right at my face, and I don't have the reflexes that I used to have, and I'm not.
You just bring a big point up, John, which is because the argument has always been just pay more attention to the game. Well, it's not reasonable to expect their average consumer to be able to have the reflexes to do anything about 100-mile-an-hour
Absolutely.
line drive.
Plus, it's
even if
the
they are
Orioles.
paying attention
Nobody's
to it.
paying. You can't pay attention to the whole game
Even
for
if you
God's
are
sake.
paying it,
They're
even
awful.
if you are paying attention to it, though, even if you are paying attention to it,
Yeah.
the idea that you can expect the public to do anything about that.
I'm in my mid 40s, right? So I've got
20s,
better
you might not have been
reflexes
able to
than
do
a 4-year-old girl, and better reflexes than most 70-year-old women, but not all of them. And there's probably, if the net wasn't there, I could have got clocked. I'm not gonna, I 20 years ago I'd say no, I'd be fine. But now, the hell if I know. So I loved the fact that netting was there. I support you, Steve, because of course, as you know, we agree 100% on everything. I also believe that pole to pole, I think is fine. People complaining that you can't see, that's nonsense. You can totally see.
Well, look, I've been to more baseball games than almost anybody because I've had 2 kids who've played,
Sure.
Baseball and select baseball forever since they were 4 and 5 years old. I've been to a lot of baseball games. I've spent a lot of weekends watching baseball. And do you really want to look through a netting or a fence? No, not really. But it's not the end of the world. You will get over it, and it's much safer. And these are kids. I mean, they're not hitting 100-mile-an-hour line drives either.
Let's take the glass off the walls at NHL and see how that goes down for
Well, it's
people.
funny you say that because years ago, there was no netting glass and everything at the hockey games. And in 2001, I believe somebody got hit by a puck and was seriously injured. And the commissioner at the time said, we're putting netting up. It's going to go 18 feet high or whatever it is.
Bettman?
And yeah, Bettman. Thank you. And you're going to get over it and you'll forget about it in 3 minutes from now. And that's exactly what's happened.
Yep.
Nobody cares and they're safer. So again, I'm an advocate for stringing netting from foul pole to foul pole. You will get over it. I promise.
Chris?
So that's my thoughts.
I remember when men were men, and if you wanted to protect yourself at a baseball game, you bring a mitt so you could catch a fly ball.
Yeah, so why didn't that 4-year-old girl be a man? That's my question. That's what I want to know.
I don't know. I mean, I've been in a minor league hockey
Man
arena
up, shorty.
when a girl got hit in the mouth with a flying puck. This is probably 1990, and it was harrowing. You got 13,000 people, and there was a lot of people there because we were in the midst of the longest winning streak in professional sports history at the time. But it's a harrowing sound for sure. I don't know, but then if you look at the chances of people getting hit and the statistical probability, it starts to get pretty low. So where does it end? You're right. I didn't know about that death, and so that actually might be your compelling narrative in the end. But will I care if they put up nets, and will I understand if they do? Yes, but I do think it'll be somewhat of an overreaction.
Well, you see, except Chris, I hear you, and we talked about this before the show. You could the classic example when you talk about legal stuff in the law, in law school is, and you're talking about consequential damages, is to say, I could put a meteor shield over my house, and yeah, sure, that would protect me from meteors, but the chances of it are, slim to none that a meteor is ever going to hit your house. But in this case, the cost of putting netting up is inconsequential for Major League Baseball. It would cost very little.
It's a net.
By baseball terms, it would cost very little. So, yes, the chances are slim that things like what happened in Houston are going to happen. But on the other hand, the cost is very low too. And I would argue that these season ticket holders, which they're really worried about, will get over themselves. If they don't, there's other people going to buy the tickets.
I have a new thing that I'm worried about, which is that if Chris was enjoying the longest hockey winning streak in the early 90s, I fear I may have just discovered that he is a Penguins fan. Is this correct?
No, you missed a key point. I said minor league.
Oh, minor league. Thank God. Because I really like you, Chris.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, please.
I was really worried for a moment.
I hate them more than any team in professional sports. The Penguins, but More than the Cowboys.
Okay.
But no. I was 1990. The fall of 1990. The Peoria Rivermen were
Of course.
About to break the longest professional sports winning streak in history.
How the hell did I forget the Peoria Rivermen?
How could you? How could you?
I'm
See,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I've lived everywhere too.
This is completely on me.
Can either of you say you lived in Peoria, Illinois?
I lived in Illinois, not Peoria.
I would not admit if I did, sir.
Well, Chris Larry did not play in Peoria. All right, so we have another one about how do we protect people from themselves and their entertainment choices, and that is, the SEC, right? Can't decide if they're providing a stadium full of bubbas with beer or not. John, do you have the details on this one?
I do not, but my understanding is that people want to buy alcohol at games, and most of them are of age, and then somebody's going to sell it to them.
Okay, really quickly.
That's the rundown of the story from my perspective.
No, well, okay, really quickly. The issue is that the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, has always prohibited the sale of alcohol in stadiums during games. Okay, and the idea here is that these are, for the most part, a bunch of idiot college students, and we're trying to keep them from drinking, and doing something awful by drinking too much. And so let's prohibit alcohol sales. They've reversed that policy this week to allow sales of alcohol in stadium. Yes, it's about money, because it's always about money for sure. But I would actually make the argument that it may actually be safer to sell alcohol in the stadiums and not force these kids to just drink a ton at the tailgate before the games, which is what was happening. There was a lot of bad things going on at the tailgates because they would get loaded in a very short period of time immediately. And now that there's alcohol sales in the stadium, maybe the drinking will be paced out a little bit more than it otherwise was. So you could argue that, yes, it's about money, but it may actually make things actually better.
You're making it impossible, Steve, for us to attempt to guess which side of the fence you're going to come down on when it comes to substances.
That's always good. I'm just saying I think that's probably the rationale. They can justify by saying, yes, we're going to make a lot more money. But yes, it's also, if you have to go, it'll spare some of the binge drinking in the parking lot.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. If you allow for the sale of substances, you can regulate it, and therefore it makes it safer for everybody.
That's not what I said. I'm saying that's what the FE said. I'm saying that's what the SEC is saying. I think probably with either that or it's a blatant money grab, and that's it. It's just maybe the more likely answer.
Also a revenue stream, correct?
Which I don't care about.
There's no denying that, though. I mean, I think whether the degree of cynicism in which they're employing that argument, your mileage may vary, but there's no denying that the binge drinking and the tailgating is definitely a problem rules and laws always have unintended consequences, right? And so, this is the historical rule, and it's created this unintended consequences of basically, heightened binge drinking just outside the stadium. So it's it has to be, those things have to be looked at, and smart research will tell you which way to fix the trends, and they'll probably be trying to do that to some degree. And to call back to our last story, your chances of being harmed in a sports stadium are much higher by someone intoxicated than they are by the flotsam and jetsam of the game reaching you in the crowd. Your live drinking flotsam and jetsam are a lot more dangerous than your random articles. So that's problematic. So that's something these stadiums have got to contend with. And yes, there's a ton of money in beer sales. And I'll stand up for the college kids for a second. I think, especially in the SEC, you've got just as much problems with alumni, or dare we say, local fans of the team, contributing to bad behavior. I think if we just admitted that the SEC was a pro league, and we just made the SEC the rival NFL League Two type of thing, your problems would remain the same.
Yeah, and of course the cynic in me says the most likely outcome is that people will continue to binge drink in the parking lot, and then will also buy beer in the stadium, and thereby they've just made it worse for the sake of making a buck. That's actually what if you want the end of positive, Steve, let's end that now, and let's say that that's probably the most likely thing is that the tailgates will still be awful, and now they'll buy beer in the stadium, and so you'll have more problems. That's probably all to make money, and that's probably the God's honest truth.
Well, there we go. We have really just played with all angles of the nanny state today. It's definitely been our theme, angles of the nanny state. So I think that's a good place to end. My name is Chris Larry. You can find me at ChrisLarry33 on Twitter. I apologize to our fan base. I've fallen down a little bit on the social media tip on the Just Business Pod Twitter account, but I will get that up and going this week.
You're fired, Chris.
I know.
That's it.
Where can they not find you all?
You can't find me at John_Worrell at Twitter.com. You can try. I won't answer.
You can't find me on Twitter at all, individually, but I inhabit the Hogside Twitter more often than not.
I'll tell you how much I use Twitter. I believe I just gave my Twitter handle as an email address.
Yeah.
Oh, did you?
I put it in email address form at Twitter.com.
The 12-year-old girl in me is rolling at the 12-year-old girl in you, John.
Oh, hit me up with a sticker.
Rolling our
maybe.
eyes. Steve, real quick, the Hogside's been hopping lately. Why don't you give a quick plug to the other properties of the network?
Okay. Obviously, we've got the Hogsty Show, which is the flagship show of the site. Rick Snyder, the longtime beat writer for the Redskins, does the Seasons of Discontent podcast with us, which is a great show. This past week, he talked about his coverage of the sale of the Redskins 20 years ago. And, Rick's probably the most knowledgeable of anybody in the Washington media about that. It was fascinating. So that's that show. We've got tons of written content that are coming out, every day almost. So the site has really grown by leaps and bounds. And I'd encourage you all to listen and watch. Particularly, please support Rick's show so we can keep him happy.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.